Merci Franca et merci à tous pour votre présence aujourd'hui. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici. Thanks so much, everyone. Really pleased to be here. And thanks to Franca and thank you to the Canadian Internet Society for convening Digital Access Day once again. What makes this day valuable is not simply the issues on the agenda, but the way you're choosing to engage with them. You've brought together policymakers, researchers, community practitioners, technologists, and advocates, not to debate technology in the abstract, but to focus on how digital systems actually function in people's lives. And that grounding really matters. Because today's theme, access, autonomy, and the open internet, isn't theoretical. It's practical, it's pragmatic, and increasingly consequential for how Canadians work, learn, participate, and innovate. These three ideas are often, and unfortunately, discussed separately. Access is usually framed as connectivity or an affordability challenge. Autonomy is discussed in terms of sovereignty, resilience, or national capacity, and the open internet is sometimes treated as a legacy principle, important historically, but assumed rather than actively designed for. But in practice, these ideas cannot be separated. The way we pursue autonomy shapes who has access. The way we design access shapes who will benefit from sovereignty. And the way we sustain openness determines whether autonomy and access reinforce or undermine one another. When we talk about digital sovereignty, the conversation can quickly become abstract or even polarized. But sovereignty does not live in principle alone. It lives in systems. In operational terms, sovereignty is shaped by very concrete choices. Where digital infrastructure is located, who controls data, under what rules, and for whose benefit, how resilient systems are to disruption, concentration, or external pressure, and whether organizations and individuals can make meaningful choices. Seen this way, sovereignty is not about isolation or self-sufficiency. It's about capacity and agency. It's about understanding dependencies and being intentional about which ones we accept, which ones we mitigate, and where we choose to build strength. This framing becomes increasingly important as AI transitions from being a specialized capability to a form of general digital infrastructure. Canada is in the process of developing an AI strategy, and you heard from the Parliamentary Secretary much of the work that's been underway, and thank you to so many of you who participated in our national public consultations to be able to get to where we're at now. And while I won't necessarily preempt my minister as to what exactly is in that strategy and when it will come out, I think the challenge that we are responding to is clear. AI is no longer peripheral. It's beginning to shape productivity across sectors, influence how knowledge is generated and applied, and affect how decisions are made by businesses, governments, and individuals. From the perspective of access and sovereignty, the most important AI questions are not limited to technical performance or model capability. They are questions of participation. Who has access to compute? Who can afford to adopt AI? And who is dependent on tools they cannot control, inspect, or meaningfully challenge? These questions determine whether AI becomes a force for broader agency or deeper dependency. This is why access and inclusion are not secondary considerations, they are design constraints. Across Canada, digital outcomes remain uneven across affordability, connectivity, skills, and trust. Those gaps matter because they shape not only whether technology exists, but whether it is usable and beneficial. This is particularly evident when we turn to compute infrastructure. AI increasingly depends on access to large-scale compute. Without compute, participation is constrained regardless of talent or ideas. The Sovereign Compute Infrastructure Program reflects Canada's efforts to strengthen domestic computing capacity so that researchers, innovators, and institutions can build and use AI systems in Canada. From a sovereignty perspective, this is not about closing borders. It's about ensuring that foundational capability is not solely external or concentrated among a small number of actors, and that the Canadian players can meaningfully participate in a growing market and supply chain. From an access perspective, it's about reducing barriers so compute is available to a wider range of users, and so the compute industry becomes a source of Canadian strength. From a resilience perspective, it's about diversification and choice. Trust is another foundational pillar. Minister Solomon often says technology moves at the speed of innovation, but adoption moves at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
That's why we've committed to tabling legislation to update Canada's private sector privacy framework, PIPEDA, to reflect a digital and data-intensive economy. Clear and modern privacy expectations create the conditions under which organizations can innovate responsibly and people can participate confidently. Safety and accountability also matter. Strengthening AI safety, transparency, and risk management supports confident adoption and long-term trust. We've already seen, just in the last few days, the degrees to which AI system and safety can implicate Canadians and undermine or potentially underpin the foundational efforts by which our economy survives. Whether or not our banking system, our critical infrastructure can survive AI's capabilities will be a question of access, of talent, of trust, and of ensuring that we have all of the right measures in place to be able to bring together the expertise, but also the foundational security to be able to protect Canadians. Infrastructure choices reinforce all of these dynamics. In Budget 2025, the government announced measures related to sovereign digital infrastructure, including elements tied to AI and compute. Infrastructure strengthens autonomy only if it is interoperable, affordable, and accessible to those who need it. These discussions intersect with Indigenous and community perspectives on digital sovereignty, which remind us that autonomy and control take different forms depending on history, geography, and lived experience. All of this sits alongside a continued commitment to the open internet. Openness supports competition, experimentation, participation, and resilience. Interoperability supports portability. Diversity of providers reduces risk. What I appreciate about today's agenda is that it treats these as connected. Access, affordability, skills, AI adoption, compute, privacy, infrastructure, cybersecurity, and governance are not separate conversations. Certainly in my lived reality, this is what my day looks like. These are not siloized policy discussions to be talked about in their closed borders, but actually they will only work when we can actually bring these things together. We need to talk about the foundation layer of trust that's predicated on effective mechanisms for privacy and control. We need to talk about how trust fuels adoption and how adoption is predicated on access, on affordability, on choice, and on skills. We then need to talk about the degree to which that actually translates into economic benefit and to meaningful applications in all of the ways we know that these new technologies can come to bear, whether in healthcare, in city planning, in emergency management, in energy, in infrastructure. All of these are spaces where we will necessitate to have the full policy stack, from trust to skills to infrastructure to choice to industry players, all the way through to capital access and applications. So how do we build a digital future that is resilient, inclusive, and grounded in real agency? Answering that question is less about ideology and more about intentional design, empirical learning, and sustained attention. It's about bringing these conversations together, which is why I'm so gratified to see the way in which this agenda has taken shape and ensure that you'll have a very meaningful set of conversations over the course of the day to really bring together what needs to come together in order for Canada to succeed in an age of AI. So a huge thank you to the Canadian Internet Society for creating space for this conversation and to all of you for being willing to participate in it. Merci à tous.